Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are joined by Jeffrey Sachs. So welcome back to the program.
Great to be with you again. Thanks.
The topic we were going to discuss today was the decline of diplomacy over the past 30 years, at least the quality of the diplomacy, and also the decline of peace movements. At least during the Cold War, we had the sense to talk to our opponents and we were allowed to discuss the security concerns of our opponents. And not so much these days. Indeed, we might be facing something similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis now, following the attack on Russia's nuclear forces, with, yeah, I guess, likely support from the US and other NATO countries. Yet I'm seeing nothing of the sort. Instead of scrambling to prevent Armageddon, our media and our governments appear to be leaning towards celebration. How can you explain this madness? Because this is obviously, well, this was not normal in the past.
This is a kind of madness because we are all endangered by the events of recent days. The Ukrainian, but almost surely Western intelligence uh, agency attack on strategic bombers deep inside Russia is a provocation of extraordinary proportions for many, many reasons. Uh, and yet, it, as you say, is being discussed as if it's a victory in a video game, just another clever notch rather than a profound destabilization, further profound destabilization of the nuclear arms framework. Part of the problem that we should just mention at the beginning is that the Russian bombers, according to many uh, authoritative accounts, were in open view of satellite monitoring precisely because of nuclear arms control agreements that left the strategic forces to monitoring by the other side of the agreement, and therefore left them exposed. Now, Ukraine has come along using Western intelligence for this attack. Of course, we're not told at all, and we never will be told, the role of the CIA and MI6 in this attack, but there is a very good reason to believe that uh, these organizations either led this attack or were deeply involved in it. Uh, but in any event, the intelligence from the US was used for this attack. And there's only gloating about the fact that this has occurred, even though it undermines a critical component of nuclear arms control between the two nuclear superpowers. The frivolousness, the foolishness, the recklessness of Western behavior and of the Western media are shocking. Absolutely shocking, and they show no understanding and insight whatsoever into our global dangers. Now, you raise the question, why is this so? And of course, it's a puzzle. That's what we're trying to understand. Where did even the sense of self-preservation go? Because we are getting closer and closer to nuclear war through this kind of recklessness. And whenever that risk is raised, we're told, don't worry about it. It's a bluff. It's nothing to worry about, which itself is a form of reckless idiocy because, of course, we are facing real risks, and no politician should be so obtuse as to not understand that. So, where does all of this come from? I think probably at the core is the profound arrogance of the US government and of its allied intelligence agencies after the end of the Soviet Union. I think, in one sense, all that we are experiencing of the last 34 years since the 1991 demise of the Soviet Union reflects a shocking arrogance of the United States security state and of the CIA, which since that moment has felt that it could act with impunity, that it could act unilaterally, that it could abandon all treaty frameworks and all agreements. And that arrogance, of course, arose with the U.S. idea that it was now the unchallenged global hegemon, and now it could do as it pleased, whether launching wars, overthrowing states, engaging in coups and assassinations, or abandoning the nuclear arms framework. Uh, this week's attack was a kind of abandonment of the nuclear arms framework, but there have been many since the end of the Soviet Union. The United States has essentially abandoned one treaty commitment after another, starting in 2002 with the unilateral abandonment by the U.S. of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, including 2019, the abandonment of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty. Of course, in the current phase of the U.S.-Russia conflict in Ukraine, the effective end of the New START agreement. We don't have a nuclear arms control framework because the United States has walked out of it unilaterally, and actions this week further amplify the fact to Russia that they are under a strategic attack by the United States. It's extraordinarily dangerous and reckless, but all compounded by the fact that the risks are not even recognized. They're not even acknowledged. They're not even mentioned. Our mainstream media are so obtuse and ignorant, or so willfully under the thumb of the CIA, that we get no uh, inkling of any implications of what's happened this week.
It doesn't happen in a vacuum either. I mean, the overall path of the world now, not only are we now backing and aiding at least many of the European countries and the United States genocide in Gaza, but also these threats of war with Iran, which could be a world war on its own, talking about war with China, which could also end the world, and now, yeah, attacking the nuclear forces of Russia, something that would be a nightmare situation during the Cold War. And it's just, as you said, it's brushed off. And indeed, it's presented as, if you're pro-Ukraine, then you have to clap like a seal. And if you're critical of it, then you're somehow pro-Russian. This is kind of the new intellectual level we have. And it's not just the media, it's the politicians. They seem like fanatics. This I don't understand where again where's the opposition? Why are there no peace movements? Indeed, the peace movement seems to be arguing that peace depends on defeating Russia. It's I can't really make sense of this. I don't know how did we become the fanatics here?
The only thing I can say about this in trying to understand is that these relentless warmongers like Starmer, like uh, Emmanuel Macron, like Merz, uh, are unpopular in their own countries. So we could say that part of this approach is maintained by the progressive collapse of the ethos of democracy, in that what is happening does not reflect public opinion by and large. And that is despite the fact that the public is inundated with propaganda in favor of this ongoing war. It's not true that the mainstream public in Europe or the United States wants this war. So not only are the politicians and this corporate media uh, on a relentless course of war. Uh, but despite all of the propaganda, they don't have the public rooting for war. Now, what is true is there is no organized opposition to this that has any effect whatsoever. The politicians rate in sometimes the the teens or in the 20s in percent approval ratings. Uh, Yet they still somehow carry out their functions. Their governments don't fall. Opposition politicians rarely take office, partly because the ones that would be in opposition are blocked from power still, either by being disqualified in actual elections, as happened in Romania, uh, and perhaps is happening in France right now, or by a coalition of parties, the historic governing parties, uh, getting together to somehow try to cobble very fragile uh, coalitions to block the voices that oppose the war. So I think it just adds another measure of complexity to your question, which is why are our political institutions so utterly ineffective in bringing some kind of control over this situation, despite the clear unpopularity of this. Now, it's true, people are not by and large out in the streets. Uh, that raises other questions, though that's not a very effective form of control over foreign policy. We basically have lost the control of our political institutions over foreign policy. I think foreign policy has been guided in the United States for decades by the proverbial deep state, which means the unaccountable uh, institutions that operate in secrecy and operate by lies. The CIA, first and foremost among them, but not the only one. So the benumbing of our politics, the unaccountability of our foreign policy is part of this story. Again, it is born in the arrogance that took over American foreign policy, and apparently, to my surprise, that of the U.S. vassal states in Europe to an incredible extent after 1991. But there is a kind of benumbing of this effect, a deep cynicism and skepticism throughout the West that our institutions are actually working. Our governments are unpopular and justly so, but it doesn't lead to self-reflection or self-correction to this point. Trump is a puzzling and I could say interesting figure in this. Of course, he's so unstable in his behavior, in his demeanor, in his messaging that we can't make heads or tails of Trump. Uh, but you get the glimmers of an idea that he would like the war in Ukraine to stop, but he seems incompetent or unable to do so, maybe simply not in control. Uh, when you take an event as just occurred, where Ukraine has taken an action that is profoundly dangerous and destabilizing, there's not a word from the White House, not an expression of concern. There is the inside question, who knew what, when? Again, I think it's the overwhelming uh, view of experts that, of course, this was a CIA planned and executed operation, not carried out by 18 months stealthily by a country 100% dependent on U.S. intelligence. There are reports that the U.S. Secretary of Defense watched all of this in real time. Uh, Whether that's true or not, again, we don't know, and we're not going to know because the government lies and there will be no definitive proof of this. But all of that would run against the public narrative of Trump trying to bring parties to the negotiating table. And then when an event like this occurs, we have no explanation, no comment, uh, not even a question mark raised by these fools at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, as if that's even a question to be asked. So, does Trump play a role in foreign policy? Not clear. But this just adds to the mystery.
Well, yeah, it seems, well, I guess evident that American and likely British intelligence services must have participated or at least at a minimum known about this and given its approval. But is there any chance that Trump didn't know? Because, either he's complicit or this is I guess, a spectacular show of incompetence. He keeps making the point that this is not his war, but as you said, with his silence, no comments, this is also becoming now this is Trump's attack now on Russia's nuclear forces. This is well, do you think there's any chance he didn't know about this? Because I'm trying to figure out if they're, crazy or disorganized, or it's very hard to understand what is going on.
Exactly. I'm sorry, I can't give an answer. I'm so far from the inside on this. I would say that there is a quite good chance that Trump personally did not know. He's not an organized person. He does not systematically process intelligence briefings. Um, Even so, if that were the case, uh, a president with his responsibility uh, after the fact would say something to the public, say something to his CIA, say something to the Russians, say something to not have this spiral into catastrophe. Again, has he said something privately? I doubt it. Not the way this White House works. Would this have happened and not be known in one way or another? But the fact, plainly on the surface, that he has said nothing in public is also profoundly insidious in its implications for trying to reach some kind of negotiated end to this war. Really, how can Russia negotiate a peace if complex intelligence operations attacking the absolute core of its national security are undertaken in this manner in the same moment that peace negotiations are being pressed by the United States? The answer is it can't. Uh, Russia can have no uh, trust, of course, whatsoever in the regime in Ukraine. That goes without saying. But Russia cannot have trust in the United States government under circumstances like this either. It makes it extraordinarily difficult to see any prospect other than ongoing war. That, it is widely argued and believed, is the deep state intention. Uh, Again, that raises all sorts of questions. For what reason uh, does the CIA, MI6, and others uh, want continued war? Is it that it's just good business? Well, that's no doubt part of it. That's the mindset, that's the incentives. Could be true for Zelensky and his gang as well, that this is just the money-making operation. It's their business operation. It could be the arrogance and unaccountability and recklessness that we've seen repeatedly at play in U.S. foreign policy over the last 34 years. Um, again, these are puzzles rather than, at least on my part, any kind of definitive answers because there's no honest accounting of any of this.
So, how can Russia respond to this, or do you have any, I guess, informed predictions? Because I spoke this morning with a former Indian ambassador, Badr Kumar, who was very usually soft-spoken, was calling for de-escalation, but now he saw it as being I guess, irresponsible not to respond. So effectively arguing that Russia should now unleash its Oreshnik missiles and again unleash fury upon its opponent, not just the Ukraine, but also on Western countries who had attacked its nuclear forces. Now, again, this isn't this came from the logic that you can't have international stability based on nuclear deterrence if one accepts that this is the new normal, that from now on we can attack Russia's nuclear forces, destroy its nuclear bombers, and somehow Russia will not do anything. So it's again this it's a nightmare situation. It's a scenario, to be honest, if this happens. But how can Russia respond now? Because this is it's if there is no response, this could be seen as more irresponsible than an actual response. So how does one maintain the nuclear deterrent if there is no, I guess, retaliatory strike?
A fundamental problem in reaching peace is that when one side shows restraint, if the other side interprets that as weakness, and now you go for the blood, then obviously showing restraint, which is a predicate for peace, becomes impossible. And that is the deadly logic that the neocons and the deep state have exercised for more than 30 years. Any show of restraint by one side has been interpreted by the United States as an invitation for being even more aggressive. And that is an argument that was immediately raised in the aftermath of this attack on Russia's strategic bombers. You see how clever Ukraine is. You see how they can have the fight in them. You see how this can must go on and can go on. And we have absolutely dreadful fools like Senator Lindsey Graham, who's one of the prime idiots of American politics, who chortles happily about such events. The implication of this, indeed, is that hardliners on both sides prevail. And when hardliners on both sides prevail, that means escalation. When escalation occurs between two nuclear superpowers, that means that we step closer to the risk of all-out nuclear war. And that's indeed what has happened this week. I hope against hope that Russia would not attack Germany or Britain or the United States in retaliation for this. Russia interprets this as an attack by the US and Britain directly because they assume with high plausibility and no denial or no cogent denial that the West was deeply implicated in this, or should have been, because this is this regime is their creation. So Russia's view is yes, there is that responsibility of the West. If such a direct attack were to occur, we would face easily and obviously a spiral to nuclear war. What I think is more likely and more plausible is that Russia interprets this as basically the need to militarily defeat Ukraine And this is what former President Medvedev said immediately after this attack. Well, that this is clear. It means that the Ukraine regime needs to end. And I think that that is the plausible reading of all of this. So I believe that it means an escalation of the war in Ukraine. Uh, and certainly it knocked down the very foundation of any kind of peace that ostensibly was President Trump's aim.
Well, my final question is, well, what was intended to be the first question, which is uh, why we no longer discuss security concerns of our opponents? Because again, the point of departure in international security is if you want to enhance peace, you need to, discuss mutual security concerns, finding a way of mitigating it, um, and in the absence of this, the only way you can have security is, well, defeating your adversaries, well, attacking their nuclear forces, destroying them on the battlefield. But so the whole premise of how to create peace isn't really there, though. The diplomacy isn't there. If you cannot actually recognize that your opponent has legitimate security concerns, and this is not just Russia. We see this. We don't discuss Iran. We don't discuss China or the security concerns of anyone else. It's always yeah, almost yes, a cartoonish view of just simply opponents having bad intentions. Uh, Again, it didn't always used to be like this. Do you know, did you have shed some light how we ended up in this scenario where we just, yeah, run around ignorant, unable to discuss our opponent's security concerns?
I think that there is uh, uh, one view that um, accounts for this approach, and then there's a deeper argument, I would say. One view is that diplomacy is useless. This is a widely held view that you can't have diplomacy. The other side is evil and cheats, and so diplomacy is only an exercise in naivete. And this has a widespread uh, a widespread echo in all public narratives and discourse in the West. Essentially, it recites endlessly um, Munich 1938. Why have diplomacy? The other side will cheat. Don't appease. Don't be an idiot. Don't be a sap. Uh, don't get taken for a ride. Diplomacy is useless. So that's one view, which is diplomats are naive background noise. The real issue is power, and those who take this view think that conflict is inevitable, and that that's the real state of affairs. So anyone talking about peacemaking is, you know, a university professor who doesn't understand the real world. So this is a view that is extraordinarily dangerous, extraordinarily ahistorical, extraordinarily reckless, especially in the nuclear age. But it is a widespread view. It raises a second question. Where did that view really come from? And I think that there are maybe two parts of the answer. One is an intellectual part. Uh, I I blame game theory a lot for this, actually, at an intellectual level, because game theory is actually the way that it's practiced, a very naive way that it's practiced, is uh, you don't talk to your opponent, you calculate based on their moves, and so there's no need for diplomacy in game theory. The irony, of course, in game theory is that you often end up in mutual disaster, as game theory shows. So game theory misses in some sense, the point that that kind of behavior is mutually reckless. But I think that fundamentally, I would come back to a different view. Most countries in the world try to engage in diplomacy still. Diplomacy hasn't disappeared. There was diplomacy between Iran and Saudi Arabia that was a very important rapprochement. There is diplomacy taking place in many parts of the world. It's in the West and principally in the U.S. alliance where diplomacy disappeared. And I believe that this, at the very core, is not from game theory or from perceptions of the evil of the other side, but is from the arrogance of power. I come back to the basic idea that U.S. leaders came to believe in the course of many decades that they could do whatever they want. And that that view continues until this day, that there are no limits to power, and that ultimately the U.S. will prevail and therefore should do anything, uh, overthrow governments, kill opponents, support genocides, give intelligence to destroy strategic bombers of your opponent and so forth, because the U.S. Is and remains the unchallenged uh, power of the world. Of course, to my mind, this is an insanity, not an accurate description of the state of power in a nuclear age when the United States is vulnerable to destruction precisely by the kinds of actions that it instigates, that is, provocations against other nuclear powers. But I believe that it is that mindset at the core that led to the destruction of diplomacy over the last 30 years. I would say that there is a precedent for this. To my mind, Britain behaved with repeated, almost unrelenting lies and cynicism during its apogee as a world hegemon. And Britain never abided by treaties, always broke them at convenient moments, always viewed power as the ultimate issue. And that view came from Britain's superiority of power, not from the logic of conflict and the logic of peace. And so I think what we're seeing is a kind of Anglo-Saxon tradition over 2 centuries that is not yet brought under control of the reality of our time. The reality is a multipolar world, but the mindset still is of a unipolar world.
Well, Professor Sachs, like always, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And yeah, it's I wish there was a more cheerful topic. This is just horrifying. But yeah, thanks again.
Well, we'll continue the discussions. I'm grateful to have them with you. Thanks a lot and see you soon.